Can you tell me a little bit about your first study that you did in 2009 about parent-child interaction with TV background noise?
So we had just over 50 parents and children come to the lab. The kids were 12, 24, or 36 months old, so 1, 2, and 3 years old. They played in a room that was sort of like a living room. Our lab was designed like a living room with a couch and a television and a bunch of toys around. Parents were asked to just act like they normally would for an hour at home when they're playing with their child. And then for half of that hour, we had the TV on, and the TV was showing a program the parents chose, but it was an adult-directed program, so like a game show or a sitcom or a cooking show, so not children's TV. For the other half of the hour, the TV was off. So for half of the kids, they played for 30 minutes with no TV, and then the TV came on. For the other half of the kids, they played for 30 minutes with the TV on, and then the TV was off for 30 minutes.
What did you find?
What we were interested in the first study was how parents interact with their children and vice versa, how children interact with their parents when the TV's on versus off. So we have the same parents and children with and without TV. And we were interested in things like how often do parents play with their children? When they do play with their children, are they attentive and focused and actively engaged, or are they more disengaged, more distracted, less actively engaged in their children's play? We were also interested in how often they talk to their children. How many words did the children actually hear? And when children had a question, how quickly did parents respond? So those were the kinds of things we were looking at.
After you guys went through the study, what did you guys find out?
Within the same family, so we had the same families with TV and without TV, we found about a 20% drop in how many words parents said to their children when the TV was on compared to when it was off, and a similar drop in the amount of active engagement they had in their children's play. So the amount of time that parents were not involved in their children's play in any way went up when the TV was on, and the amount of time they were actively engaged in their children's play decreased when the TV was on.
Why is it that parental interactions, why is this so important for kids' development?
There's a lot of research showing that high quality active parent-child interaction during those early years is a good predictor of a whole bunch of cognitive and social skills later in life: language development, social emotional development, and cognitive development.
What did the findings suggest?
The findings suggest that if parents have TV on in the background, so keep in mind this is TV the kids aren't really interested in, it's made for adults, they're not really watching it. And the parents were free to watch the TV if they wanted to, but often didn't. Usually they put their backs to the TV and sat down on the floor to play with their kids. Nonetheless, we see that they're talking to their children less and playing with them less and in lower quality ways when the TV's on. So for us, the take-home message is if you want to engage with your children and have playtime or high-quality verbal engagement, then it's best to do that without the TV on in the background.
And you did a second analysis of this study. Can you talk a little bit about that?
In our second analysis of this study, we were interested in how children play and how long they play with the toys before moving on to something else and how much toy play they engage in. And this is especially important for the younger kids, the infants in this study. So we were interested in how much time they spent playing with toys when the TV was on versus off and how that was influenced by their interactions with their parents. In earlier work, we had found that these younger kids, the infants and toddlers, play with toys less often when the TV's on than when it's off, so the TV kind of distracts from their toy play. In the second study, we were interested in whether we still find that if parents were engaged with them. And what we found is that we see a negative impact of background TV on children's play, but only when parents kind of disengage from that play when the TV's on. For parents who stay actively engaged, even when the TV's on, there wasn't really an effect on children's play.
Is there something that they can do besides turning off the TV? If they need that noise, what can they do?
Sort of the rule of thumb is to turn the TV off if nobody's watching it. So when the TV's in use, make that kind of an intentional act. So sit down and watch it, talk about the content together. And if they're not actively watching the TV, just turn it off. But that's not always a possibility. For some families, they might have little space. So when one person's watching TV, the child also happens to be in the room playing with toys with the TV on. In those cases, what we recommend, if it's not possible to keep the TV off all the time, is to at least ensure that there's some quiet time during the day when kids can play and interact with parents and caregivers without that background distraction. So it doesn't necessarily mean there can't be any TV time in the day. It just means try to fit in some quality, high quality interactions and verbal exchanges without the TV on in the background.
And this was all focused on cognitive development of the kids, not so much on the social or the emotional development because they're not getting upset that their parents are not paying attention to them as much as they want them to.
One of the things we did look at is how often children ask their parents questions, like asking them to look at something or asking them to help with a puzzle. And we did find that parents were slower to respond, if they responded at all, when the TV was on. And that kind of active responsiveness and quick responsiveness is a predictor of child outcomes as well. In some cases, these things predict language and cognitive outcomes. In other cases, they predict social emotional outcomes. So early play and early high-quality parent-child interaction is a predictor for a wide range of outcomes in a number of domains.
Could you give me some examples of those outcomes?
One of the easy ones to describe is the more children hear a variety of words in the home, so the more language they hear and the more varied language they hear, the higher their vocabularies later in life. And vocabulary is a strong predictor of academic achievement and other things down the line. Early toy play, so having kind of focused, engaged toy play early on is a predictor of cognitive functioning, like attention span and attentional control later in life. So there's a wide range of outcomes associated with play and parent-child interaction early on.
This was more about the parent not being distracted, not at all about the kids being distracted.
We thought we might see that. So one thing we thought when we first designed the studies is this is adult-directed television. Other research had shown little kids don't pay much attention to TV they don't understand. So we thought they wouldn't look at it very often. And in one respect, that's true. So they looked at the TV much less often than they would if it was in a child-directed program that they're interested in. So they only looked at the TV screen maybe 5% of the time that it was on. Nonetheless, we found that the TV had an impact on their play. So in a different study where we had parents just sit and fill out surveys, the parents were instructed to avoid interacting with their kids to the extent possible. We saw still an impact of TV, adult-directed TV, on children's play. So even though it looks like they're not paying attention, that TV is nonetheless having an effect on their play.
Anything else that you think people should know?
Another thing that I would add is it does seem like there are big individual differences. So some kids are going to be much more affected by having the TV on in the background than other kids. And we're still trying to figure out what kinds of things might affect how much the TV has an impact. One thing we do know from these studies is that age is a big factor. So even though our study had children between 1 and 3 years old, those 1 and 2-year-olds seem to show the biggest effect, both on their own play and on the quality of their parent-child interactions. So it's likely the older kids, those 3-year-olds, are better able to not only focus when they're playing by themselves and tune out the TV, but also recapture their parents' attention when their parents aren't paying attention.